My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I've learned that sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that change lives forever. This is a story about how a simple cup of coffee and a blueberry muffin revealed the invisible threads that connect us all. I never planned to work at Mabel's Corner Cafe in downtown Portland. At 32, with a degree in literature gathering dust and dreams of writing a novel that remained stubbornly unwritten, I found myself tying an apron around my waist each morning at 5 a.m. The cafe sat on the corner of Burnside and 23rd, wedged between a vintage clothing store and a bookshop that specialized in rare first editions. The location attracted an eclectic mix of customers, early rising professionals, night shift workers heading home, students cramming for exams, and the occasional tourist who had stumbled upon our little corner of Portland. "Order up, Sarah." Mabel's voice, perpetually hoarse from years of barking orders and singing along to her collection of Motown classics, pulled me from my thoughts. I grabbed the plate of avocado toast and delivered it to the young woman in the corner booth, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. Mabel's wasn't fancy. The walls were painted a warm yellow that had faded to a soft cream over the years. The wooden floors creaked reassuringly underfoot. The tables and chairs didn't match, collected from estate sales and secondhand stores over the cafe's 15-year history. But there was something about the place that felt like home. Maybe it was the smell of freshly ground coffee beans, or the way sunlight streamed through the large windows on clear mornings, casting golden patterns across the mismatched furniture. Had been working at Mabel's for nearly 4 years. 4 years of early mornings, aching feet, and memorizing the precise way each regular liked their coffee. 4 years of watching lives unfold over breakfast plates and lunch specials. I knew which customers were going through divorces, which ones had children graduating college, which ones were secretly writing novels of their own. "You look tired today, honey," Mabel said, sliding a fresh cup of coffee across the counter to me during a rare lull. She was in her 60s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and laugh lines that deepened when she smiled, which was often. "You sleeping okay?" I shrugged, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Just the usual insomnia. Nothing new." The truth was, I hadn't been sleeping well for months. My tiny apartment above the laundromat 3 blocks away was quiet enough, but my thoughts weren't. At night, they circled like restless birds, worries about my dwindling savings, my aging parents back in Ohio, the novel I couldn't seem to finish. And deeper than that, a growing fear that this temporary job had somehow become permanent, that I had forgotten how to want more. "Well, don't push yourself too hard," Mabel said, patting my hand. "The world keeps turning regardless." The bell above the door chimed, signaling a new customer. I turned, coffee pot in hand, ready to greet whoever had come in from the September chill. When I first saw him, came in quietly, none of the usual bustle of customers shaking off rain or stomping snow from their boots. He simply appeared, as if he had materialized out of the gray Portland morning. The boy couldn't have been more than 11 or 12, though he carried himself with the careful caution of someone much older. He wore a navy blue hoodie that seemed a size too large, jeans fraying slightly at the cuffs, and sneakers that had once been white but now bore the grayish tinge of many washings. What struck me most, though, were his eyes. Dark and watchful, they took in everything around him with an alertness that seemed out of place on such a young face. He moved to a table in the corner, as far from the door as possible, yet positioned so he could see both the entrance and the large windows facing the street. Approached his table, coffee pot still in hand, though I knew he was too young for caffeine. "Good morning," I said, offering my standard smile. "What can I get for you?" He met my gaze briefly, then looked down at the laminated menu. "Just water, please." His voice was soft but clear, with the slightest hint of an accent I couldn't place. "Sure thing. Would you like to see our breakfast menu? The blueberry pancakes are pretty amazing." "Just water is fine, thank you." His fingers fiddled with the corner of the menu, but his posture remained straight, almost formal. I brought him a glass of water with lemon and a straw, placing it carefully on the table. "Let me know if you change your mind about those pancakes." He nodded, then pulled a paperback book from his backpack, a worn copy of The Giver by Lois Lowry. I recognized it immediately. It had been one of my favorites growing up. As I moved back behind the counter, Mabel raised an eyebrow. School's in session, isn't it? What's he doing here? I shrugged. Maybe it's a teacher workday or something. Throughout the morning rush, I found myself glancing repeatedly at the boy's table. He sat perfectly still, turning pages of his book with careful precision, occasionally sipping his water. He never asked for anything else, never made any trouble. When I passed by his table at about 8:15, he was putting his book away. Heading out? I asked. Yes. Thank you for the water. He stood, slinging his backpack over one shoulder. You're welcome. Have a good day at school. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, that I had guessed his destination, before he nodded and walked out, disappearing into the stream of morning commuters. Strange kid, Mabel commented, wiping down the counter beside me. Yeah, I agreed, watching the door long after he had gone. Strange. The next morning, he came again. Same time, just after 7 a.m. Same table in the corner. Same book. Same order of just water, and the morning after that, by the end of the week, I had noticed the pattern. He would arrive at precisely 7:05 a.m., sit in the same corner, read his book, drink his water, and leave at exactly 8:15, presumably to make it to the middle school 6 blocks away before the first bell. On Friday, as I watched him reading quietly, a memory surfaced. I was 12, sitting in a McDonald's after school, nursing a small soda for hours because it came with free refills. I had a paperback propped open on the table, and I was trying to be invisible. It was the winter my mom had gone back to work and my dad had lost his job at the factory. The heat in our apartment was unreliable, and McDonald's was warm. I hadn't wanted anyone to know how much that warmth mattered. I looked at the boy again, at his too large hoodie and his careful eyes, and something twisted in my chest. Mabel, I said quietly, I'm going to make an extra order of blueberry pancakes. I think I messed up Mrs. Henderson's order earlier. Mabel looked up from the register, confusion crossing her face. Mrs. Henderson had the veggie omelet, didn't she? Yeah, but I think she also mentioned wanting pancakes for her granddaughter or something. Better safe than sorry, right? Mabel shrugged. Your call. Put it on the order wheel. 15 minutes later, I approached the boy's table with a steaming plate of blueberry pancakes, a small pitcher of maple syrup, and a pat of butter slowly melting on top. I think there was a mix-up in the kitchen, I said, setting the plate down. These were made but no one's claimed them. They'll just go to waste otherwise. Would you like them? The boy looked up, his dark eyes widening slightly. I could see the internal debate, pride warring with hunger, played out across his face in micro-expressions. It's really no trouble, I added. They'd just get thrown out. After a long moment, he nodded. Thank you. No problem. Enjoy. I walked away without lingering, giving him the privacy to eat without feeling watched. From the corner of my eye, I saw him pick up the fork with careful deliberation, cut a small piece of pancake, and bring it to his mouth. The restraint in that simple action told me everything I needed to know. When I returned to clear his plate 20 minutes later, it was empty, wiped clean with the napkin folded neatly beside it. Was everything okay? I asked. Yes. Thank you. His voice was quiet, but he met my eyes for a moment longer than usual before looking away. Good. Have a great day at school. It became our routine. Each morning, the boy would come in, order water, and I would accidentally bring him something to eat, pancakes one day, a breakfast sandwich the next, oatmeal with brown sugar and berries when the mornings turned colder. I never acknowledged that this was anything other than a happy coincidence, and he never asked questions. I learned small things about him through observation. He was meticulous, always leaving his table neater than he found it. He read constantly, working his way through what appeared to be a middle school reading list. After The Giver came Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, then The Outsiders. He never spoke to other customers and seemed to prefer it when the cafe was quieter. What I didn't know loomed larger. I didn't know his name. I didn't know where he lived or with whom. I didn't know why a child his age was alone every morning, or why he never had money for food. "You're adopting strays now?" Diego, our cook, asked one morning as I picked up another plate of accidental French toast for the boy. "Just reducing food waste," I replied lightly. Diego snorted. "Right. Mark's gonna have a fit when he checks the inventory." Mark Lawson was the owner of Mabel's, though he rarely came in before noon. Mabel had been running the place for so long that most customers assumed she owned it. Mark was in his 40s, perennially stressed about the bottom line, and had recently started wearing reading glasses that he refused to admit he needed. "I'll deal with Mark," I said with more confidence than I felt. Sure enough, 2 weeks into my morning routine with the boy, Mark called me into the tiny office at the back of the cafe. The space was barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs, with filing cabinets lining one wall and a small window that looked out on the alley behind the building. "Sarah, we need to talk about inventory," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Diego says you've been giving away food." I remained standing, arms crossed. "I've been reducing waste by utilizing food that would otherwise be thrown out. That's not how a business works, and you know it." Mark removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We can't just give away free food to every sad-looking kid who wanders in. It's one kid, Mark. One meal a day. And how are you accounting for it?" "Because I'm looking at the numbers, and they don't add up." I hesitated. The truth was, I hadn't been accounting for it at all. I'd been hoping no one would notice. "I'll pay for it myself," I said finally. "Out of my paycheck." Mark leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You barely make enough to cover your rent, Sarah." "It's my choice." I met his gaze steadily. "One meal a day. I can handle it." After a long moment, Mark sighed. "Fine. But you need to ring it up properly. Pay as you go, not at the end of the month. And if it affects your work or if there's any trouble, it stops immediately. Understood?" "Understood." That evening, I sat at my small kitchen table, calculating what I could afford. My apartment was modest, 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, and a living room just big enough for a second-hand couch and a bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks. The rent was reasonable by Portland standards, but still took a significant chunk of my monthly income. Add in utilities, student loan payments, groceries, and the occasional indulgence like a new book or a movie ticket, and there wasn't much left over. I could cut back on my own breakfast, I decided. Coffee at home instead of a latte from the artisanal place down the street. No more new books until I'd read the ones gathering dust on my nightstand. I could walk more, take the bus less. A small sacrifice for me, but potentially a significant difference for the boy. The next morning, I rang up a breakfast sandwich and a small orange juice under my employee discount, then delivered them to the boy's table with my usual mix-up in the kitchen explanation. If he noticed anything different about our interaction, he didn't show it. October brought colder mornings and steady rain. The boy began arriving with his hoodie slightly damp, the shoulders darkened by raindrops. I noticed he didn't have a proper jacket, just the same navy hoodie day after day. "Do you think that's his only sweatshirt?" I asked Mabel one morning as we watched him reading quietly in his corner. "Probably," she said, her voice soft with a compassion she usually kept hidden behind her brisk efficiency. "Poor kid. Wonder what his story is." I had wondered that myself, countless times. But something held me back from asking. Perhaps it was the wariness in his eyes, the careful way he held himself, as if one wrong move might shatter something fragile. Or perhaps it was the memory of my own childhood, of adults who had asked questions not out of concern but out of judgment. Whatever his story was, he wasn't sharing it. And maybe what he needed most wasn't someone to dig into his past, but simply someone to acknowledge his presence now. On a particularly stormy Tuesday in late October, the boy didn't show up. I found myself glancing at the door every few minutes, an inexplicable anxiety building in my chest as the clock ticked past 7:05, then 7:15, then 7:30. "Your young friend's a no-show," Mabel commented, following my gaze to the empty corner table. "Maybe he's sick," I said, trying to sound unconcerned. "Or maybe his family moved." "Maybe," Mabel agreed, though her tone suggested she had other theories. Either way, life goes on. But I couldn't shake the worry that had settled over me. I made a breakfast sandwich anyway, wrapping it carefully in wax paper and setting it aside, just in case. The boy didn't come the next day either, or the day after that. A week passed with no sign of him. I continued making his breakfast each morning, telling myself it was ridiculous to feel this concerned about a child I barely knew, whose name I'd never even asked. "Told you," Diego said on the 8th day of the boy's absence. "They never stick around once the free ride stops." I ignored him, but his words stung more than I wanted to admit. Had I somehow made things worse by helping? Had I attracted unwanted attention to the boy? Or had he simply moved on, as children often did, to a different school, a different neighborhood, a different life? The questions haunted me as I moved through my shifts, smiling at customers, refilling coffee cups, making small talk about the weather and local politics. I found myself watching the door, hoping for a glimpse of a navy blue hoodie, wondering if I'd ever know what had happened. On the 12th day of his absence, I was wiping down tables during the mid-morning lull when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, expecting the usual crowd of remote workers looking for their second caffeine fix of the day. Instead, I saw a man in a police uniform, his presence immediately commanding attention in the small cafe. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a face that suggested both authority and kindness. His dark hair was cut short, and he wore a neatly trimmed beard that was starting to show threads of gray despite his relatively young appearance. "Good morning," he said, approaching the counter where Mabel was arranging pastries in the display case. "I'm Officer James Reeves with the Portland Police Department. I'm looking for someone named Sarah?" Mabel's eyes flicked to me, a mixture of curiosity and concern in her expression. "That's her." I set down my cleaning cloth and walked over, my heart racing though I couldn't pinpoint why. "I'm Sarah Mitchell." "Is something wrong?" Officer Reeves smiled, softening his official demeanor. "Not at all. I was hoping to talk with you about a young man who's been coming here. Do you have a few minutes?" "Of course," I said, gesturing toward an empty table by the window, as far from other customers as possible. As we sat, I noticed Officer Reeves wasn't alone. Through the window, I could see a police cruiser parked outside, with another officer sitting inside. The sight sent a chill through me. "Is he okay?" I asked, unable to contain my concern any longer. "The boy, I mean. He hasn't been here for almost 2 weeks." Officer Reeves' expression grew serious. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. The boy's name is Miguel Ramirez. He's 12 years old and has been living on his own for the past 3 months." The information hit me like a physical blow. Living on his own? But he's just a child. "Yes, he is," Officer Reeves agreed, his voice gentle but firm. "His father, Carlos Ramirez, is a firefighter with Portland Fire and Rescue. He was critically injured in a warehouse fire in July and has been in a coma at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital since then." I pressed a hand to my mouth, the pieces starting to fall into place. "And his mother?" "She left the family 2 years ago. Miguel has an aunt in California, but according to what we've pieced together, he was afraid of being sent away while his father was still in the hospital. So he didn't tell anyone that he was essentially alone." "For 3 months?" I whispered, trying to comprehend the enormity of what this child had been dealing with. "How did he manage?" Officer Reeves shook his head, a mixture of admiration and sadness crossing his face. "Kids can be remarkably resourceful when they have to be. Miguel used the emergency fund his father had set aside, made meals last as long as possible, kept going to school so no one would get suspicious. The only reason we found out is because his father regained consciousness 4 days ago." "He's awake?" A surge of relief washed over me. Yes. He's still in serious condition, but he's awake and talking. His first concern was his son, of course. That's when the hospital realized no one had been officially caring for Miguel all this time. I thought back to the boy in Miguel, sitting quietly in the corner, reading his books, accepting food without question. The careful way he had watched the door, how he had positioned himself to see everyone who entered. He hadn't just been shy, he had been vigilant, protecting his secret. Where is he now? At the hospital with his father. His aunt has flown in from San Diego and is handling the paperwork to become his temporary guardian while Carlos recovers. I nodded, relief mixing with a strange sense of loss. Thank you for letting me know. But, how did you know to come here? To ask for me? Officer Reeves smiled. That's actually why I'm here. When Carlos woke up and learned what his son had been doing, he was understandably distraught. Miguel finally opened up about how he'd been spending his mornings, coming here, sitting in the warmth, being given breakfast by a kind waitress who never asked questions that would expose his situation. He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Carlos asked me to give you this. It's a letter from him. He wanted to thank you personally, but he's still not able to leave the hospital. With trembling hands, I took the letter. The paper was hospital stationery, the handwriting shaky but determined. Firefighters and police officers often work closely together, Officer Reeves continued. When Carlos told me about you and how you had helped his son, I promised I would find you and deliver his message. It took a bit of detective work. Miguel only knew your first name and that you worked at the cafe with the blue awning on Burnside. I unfolded the letter, feeling as though I was being granted access to something deeply personal. Dear Sarah, my name is Carlos Ramirez. I am Miguel's father. The doctors tell me I have been unconscious for over 3 months following a structure fire that collapsed while my team was inside. I am still struggling to process all that has happened during this time, especially what my son has endured alone. Miguel told me about your kindness, how you fed him every morning without making him feel like a charity case. He said you never asked why he was alone or made him feel ashamed. You just gave him food and a safe place to be for a little while each day. As a father, the thought of my son going hungry tears at my soul. The thought of a stranger showing him kindness when he needed it most fills me with a gratitude I cannot fully express. You didn't just feed a hungry child, you preserved the dignity of a firefighter's son during the darkest time of his life. The road ahead is still long. The doctors say I may never regain full mobility, but I am alive and my son is safe. For now, that is enough. With deepest gratitude, Carlos Ramirez, Portland Fire and Rescue, Station 7. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. I wiped them away quickly, embarrassed by my emotional response. He's a good man, Officer Reeves said quietly. One of the best firefighters in the city. What happened to him was a tragedy, but what could have happened to his son? He shook his head. What you did mattered, Sarah. More than you probably realized. I didn't do much, I protested. Just breakfast. Anyone would have done the same. Officer Reeves' expression turned serious. But that's just it, not everyone would have. Most people would have asked questions, called services, made assumptions. You gave him what he needed most: food without judgment, kindness without conditions. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my apron pocket. Will they be okay? Carlos and Miguel? It's going to be a long recovery for Carlos, but the prognosis is positive. The department has rallied around them. We take care of our own in the emergency services. There's a fundraiser being organized to help with medical bills and rehabilitation costs. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. If you'd like to stay updated or be involved in any way, my contact information is on there. I accepted the card, running my thumb over the embossed shield of the Portland Police Department. Thank you for coming to tell me this. It means a lot to know he's okay. Officer Reeves stood, extending his hand. Thank you for being the person Miguel needed when the world let him down. As I shook his hand, a thought occurred to me. Do you think, would it be okay if I visited them? At the hospital, I mean. I think Carlos would like that very much. And I know Miguel would too, though he might be too shy to show it. He smiled. I'll let them know you might stop by. After Officer Reeves left, I stood by the window for a long moment, watching as he got into the cruiser and drove away. The letter in my pocket felt weighty with significance, a tangible reminder that small actions could have profound impacts. Mabel appeared beside me, curiosity evident in her expression. Everything okay, honey? Yeah, I said, surprised to find that I meant it. Everything's okay. I told her about Miguel and his father, about the letter and the invitation to visit them at the hospital. As I spoke, I watched her expression shift from curious to concerned to deeply moved. Well, she said when I finished, wiping away a tear with the corner of her apron, I think you'd better take tomorrow off to go see your young friend. Paid time, of course. You don't have to do that, Mabel. I know I don't have to. But I want to. She squeezed my shoulder. Now get back to work before I change my mind and make you cover the lunch rush too. The Oregon Health and Science University Hospital perched on a hill overlooking downtown Portland, its modern glass structure gleaming in the afternoon sun. I stood in the main lobby, a small potted plant in one hand and a canvas bag containing books in the other, fighting the urge to turn around and leave. What was I doing here? Miguel was reunited with his father, his aunt was taking care of him, he had support now. He probably wouldn't even remember the waitress who had slipped him breakfast for a few weeks, but Carlos had written to me, had asked Officer Reeves to find me specifically. And something in me needed to see for myself that Miguel was truly okay. I approached the information desk, where a volunteer with silver hair and kind eyes looked up at me. I'm here to visit Carlos Ramirez, I said. He's a firefighter who was injured a few months ago. Of course, the volunteer replied, typing on her computer. Mr. Ramirez is in our rehabilitation wing, room 412. Take the main elevators to the 4th floor and follow the signs. I thanked her and made my way to the elevators, my heart pounding with inexplicable nervousness. The rehabilitation wing was quieter than I expected, the halls wide and bright with natural light streaming through large windows. Room 412 had a door that was partially open, and I could hear the soft murmur of voices from inside, knocked gently on the doorframe. Come in, called a man's voice, warm despite an underlying weariness. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was spacious for a hospital, with medical equipment along one wall and a large window offering a view of the Willamette River and the city beyond. Carlos Ramirez lay in a hospital bed that had been adjusted to a sitting position, allowing him to look toward the door as I entered. Was younger than I had imagined, probably in his mid-30s, with the same dark, watchful eyes as his son. I could see the resemblance immediately. His left arm was in a cast, and various monitors were attached to his right arm and chest. Despite his injuries, he had the solid build of someone who had spent years in a physically demanding job. Beside his bed, in a chair pulled close, sat Miguel. He was wearing clean jeans and a red Portland Fire and Rescue sweatshirt that seemed new, his dark hair neatly combed. When he saw me, his eyes widened in recognition. Sarah? Carlos asked, a smile spreading across his face. You must be Sarah from the cafe. Yes, I replied, suddenly shy. Officer Reeves told me you were here. I hope it's okay that I came. Of course it's okay. Please, come in. I stepped further into the room, setting the plant on the windowsill. I brought this for you, and some books for Miguel. I remembered which ones he was reading. Miguel looked up at the mention of his name, a mixture of surprise and something like embarrassment crossing his face. Thank you, he said quietly. My son has told me so much about you, Carlos said, gesturing for me to take the other chair in the room. About how you helped him. It was nothing, really, I said, sitting down. Just breakfast. Not nothing, Carlos insisted, his voice firm despite its weakness. Everything. You saw my son when he was trying his hardest to be invisible. You fed him when he had nothing. And most importantly, you respected his dignity by not asking questions he couldn't answer. I glanced at Miguel, who was studying his hands intently, the tips of his ears reddening. I think I recognized something in him, I admitted. When I was around his age, my family went through a tough time too. Sometimes the kindest thing isn't asking why someone is struggling, but just helping them through it. Carlos nodded, understanding in his eyes. Miguel told me you never made him feel like a charity case. You always pretended it was a mix-up in the kitchen. He smiled at his son fondly. Though he said he figured out pretty quickly that it was intentional. Miguel looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since I'd entered the room. The first few times, maybe it could have been a mistake, he said, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it at the cafe. But when it happened every day, I knew. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, curious. He shrugged, a gesture so typical of preteens that it made me smile. I was hungry. And you were nice. And. He trailed off, looking to his father. And it was easier than explaining, Carlos finished for him, understanding in his voice. Easier than risking someone calling child services or sending him to stay with relatives while I was. He gestured at himself, at the hospital bed and equipment. I was scared they'd make me go away, Miguel said simply. And then what if Dad woke up and I wasn't here? The straightforward fear in his voice made my heart ache. I thought about all the mornings he had sat in the cafe, carefully maintaining his secret, carrying a burden no child should have to bear. Well, I'm glad you're both together now, I said. And that you're recovering, Mr. Ramirez. Please, call me Carlos, he replied. And yes, the doctors say I'm making good progress, though it will be a long road. We talked for nearly an hour. Carlos told me about his career as a firefighter, his voice animated despite his weakened state as he spoke about the camaraderie of his station, the pride he took in his work. Miguel gradually relaxed, occasionally adding details to his father's stories or correcting him with the fond exasperation of a child who has heard the same tales many times, learned that they had moved to Portland from New Mexico 5 years ago, after Carlos's wife, Miguel's mother, had left them. Carlos had wanted a fresh start, and a friend had told him about openings in the Portland Fire Department. Miguel struggled at first, Carlos said, looking at his son with obvious pride. New school, new city, no friends. But he's resilient. Gets that from his grandmother, my mother. Dad, Miguel protested, embarrassed but pleased by the praise. As our conversation continued, a woman entered the room carrying a tray of food. She was in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. I thought I heard voices, she said, setting the tray on the rolling table beside Carlos's bed. You must be Sarah. I'm Elena, Carlos's sister. Nice to meet you, I said, rising to shake her hand. I've heard so much about you from both of them, Elena said, adjusting the height of the table so Carlos could reach his food. Thank you for looking out for my nephew when none of us knew he needed it. I felt my cheeks warm at her sincere gratitude. I'm just glad things worked out okay. More than okay, Elena assured me. Carlos is making great progress, and Miguel is going to come stay with me in San Diego until his father is back on his feet. My kids are thrilled to have their cousin coming to live with them for a while. I looked at Miguel, wondering how he felt about this arrangement. He met my gaze steadily, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Aunt Elena has a pool, he said, as if that explained everything. I laughed, relieved to see him acting like a normal kid excited about a pool rather than the too serious boy from the cafe. Well, that does sound pretty great. As Carlos ate his lunch and Elena fussed with his medications, Miguel moved to stand beside me near the window. I finished The Outsiders, he said, nodding toward the bag of books I had brought. It was sad but good. It's one of my favorites, I replied. That's why I brought you some others by the same author. I thought you might like them. Thanks. He hesitated, then added, I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye. Before, I mean. When I stopped coming to the cafe. That's okay. I understand why. When Dad woke up, it was really fast. The hospital called me at home. They'd been trying to reach me for hours, but I was at school. By the time I got here, everything was happening really quickly. Social workers and doctors, and then Aunt Elena flying in. Miguel, I said gently, it's really okay. I'm just glad your dad is going to be all right. And that you're going to be taken care of. He nodded, relief visible in his expression. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, did you really have a hard time when you were my age? Or did you just say that? The question caught me off guard with its directness. I really did, I answered honestly. My dad lost his job at a factory in Ohio when I was about your age. We struggled for a while. That's why I recognized something in you, I think. I remember what it feels like to be hungry and trying not to let anyone know. Did it get better? For your family? Yes, I said, thinking back to those difficult years. It took time, but my dad found another job eventually. Things were tight for a while, but we made it through. Miguel seemed to consider this, looking out at the city spread below us. Dad's going to be okay, he said with the fierce certainty of someone who needs to believe what they're saying. The doctors say he probably won't be able to go back to firefighting, but he's alive. That's what matters. Absolutely, I agreed, touched by his maturity. And he has you. Miguel's words hung in the air between us, profound in their simplicity. He has you. It was true. Despite everything, they had each other. Carlos called from the bed, his voice stronger than it had been just moments before. Sarah, would you join us for lunch? Elena always brings enough to feed an army. Elena laughed, pulling up another chair. It's true. Old habits from raising 3 teenagers. Please stay if you can. I hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that. As we sat sharing a lunch of homemade empanadas and fresh fruit, I watched the interaction between father and son. There was something there, a bond that hadn't been broken by their separation, only strengthened. Despite everything Miguel had endured, despite the fear and uncertainty, there was joy in his face as he teased his father about eating his vegetables. The doctors say you need to eat more greens, Dad, he insisted, pushing the salad portion of the tray closer to Carlos. The doctors don't have to eat this rabbit food, Carlos grumbled, but he speared a piece of lettuce with exaggerated reluctance, making Miguel smile. Elena caught my eye across the table, her expression warm with understanding. Family, she mouthed silently, shaking her head with affectionate exasperation. Family. The word echoed in my mind as I watched them together. It wasn't just biology that made a family, it was these invisible threads of care that connected people across time and circumstance. The threads that had connected me to my own parents during our hardest times. The threads that had somehow connected me to Miguel in that cafe. After lunch, Elena took Miguel down to the cafeteria for ice cream, leaving me alone with Carlos. I want to thank you properly, he said, his expression serious. What you did for Miguel, I shook my head, cutting him off gently. Please don't. I just did what felt right. That's exactly why I need to thank you, Carlos insisted. Too many people walk past what feels right because it's inconvenient or complicated or not their problem. You didn't. I thought about the small calculations I'd made, the adjustments to my budget, the bargains with Mabel and Mark. In the grand scheme of things, they had been such minor sacrifices. I'm a writer, I found myself saying. Or at least, I want to be. I've been working on a novel for years but never seemed to finish it. Carlos looked surprised by the apparent change of subject but nodded encouragingly. I think part of why I've struggled is that I've been writing about big, dramatic events, life-changing moments that transform people overnight. I gestured toward the window, toward the city below. But being with Miguel these past weeks has reminded me that life usually changes in smaller ways, a cup of coffee offered at the right moment, a kind word when someone is struggling, a meal shared without questions asked. The invisible threads, Carlos said softly. I looked at him, startled. Yes. Exactly. My mother used to talk about them, he explained. She believed that we're all connected by invisible threads of kindness and compassion. That when you follow those threads, they lead you exactly where you need to go. His eyes grew distant with memory. She would have liked you very much, Sarah. I wish I could have met her. Me too. He shifted in his bed, wincing slightly at the movement. So this novel of yours, will you finish it now? I smiled, suddenly certain. Yes. But it will be different than what I started. Better, I think. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Carlos spoke again. Miguel starts school in San Diego next month. Elena lives near the beach, it'll be good for him to have that fresh start. But we'll be back in Portland eventually. The department is holding my job in administration once I'm recovered enough. That's wonderful news. Yes, it is. He hesitated, then added, we'd like to keep in touch, if that's all right with you. Not just because of what you did for Miguel, but because, well, you seem like someone worth knowing. The simple honesty of his words caught me off guard. In that moment, I realized how isolated I had become in my own life, serving coffee to strangers, nodding at neighbors I barely knew, working on a novel I never shared with anyone. I had been as invisible in my way as Miguel had been in his. I'd like that very much, I replied. When Miguel and Elena returned, Miguel was clutching a small paper bag. I got you something, he said, thrusting the bag toward me with the awkward eagerness of a 12-year-old. From the gift shop. Inside was a simple bracelet made of braided threads in shades of blue and green. The lady said it's a friendship bracelet, Miguel explained, suddenly looking uncertain. Is that okay? It's perfect, I said, slipping it onto my wrist. Thank you. His smile was worth every breakfast I'd ever made him. Part 3. Full circle. 6 months later, I stood in front of a crowded cafe, my hands trembling slightly as I held my manuscript. Thank you all for coming tonight, I said, looking out at the sea of familiar and unfamiliar faces. This reading means more to me than I can express. Mabel's Corner Cafe had been transformed for the evening. The mismatched tables had been pushed to the sides to make room for rows of chairs. Fairy lights had been strung across the ceiling, giving the space a warm, intimate glow. On a small table near the entrance, copies of my newly published novel, The Invisible Thread, were stacked in neat piles, and the front row sat Mabel herself, beaming with pride. Beside her was Diego, who had insisted on catering the event with an array of pastries that rivaled our usual morning offerings. Mark Lawson stood at the back, nodding encouragingly, and in the center, seated together, were Carlos and Miguel Ramirez. Carlos had made remarkable progress in his rehabilitation. Though he still walked with a slight limp and couldn't lift his left arm above shoulder height, he had defied the doctor's most pessimistic predictions. He had started his new position in the fire department's community outreach division last month, visiting schools to teach children about fire safety. Miguel, now 13, had grown at least 2 inches since I'd first met him. His time in San Diego with his aunt had given him a sun-kissed glow and a confidence that showed in the way he sat up straight, meeting people's eyes when they spoke to him. He was back in Portland now, living with his father in a new apartment not far from the cafe. Also in attendance was Officer James Reeves, who had become a regular at Mabel's after delivering Carlos's letter. He sat near the back with several other officers and firefighters who had come to support their colleague's son's cafe friend turned author, as Carlos had introduced me to them. The story I'm about to share with you isn't exactly what happened in this cafe last year, I continued, but it was inspired by the people and events that reminded me why we need each other, why the smallest acts of kindness can sometimes be the most profound. As I began to read from the first chapter, I watched Miguel lean against his father's shoulder, his expression thoughtful. The novel wasn't directly about them. I had changed names, locations, circumstances, but the heart of the story was there, a child trying to remain invisible, an adult recognizing something familiar in that struggle, and the small miracle of connection that happens when we truly see each other. After the reading, as people mingled and enjoyed Diego's pastries, Carlos approached me, his copy of the book already dog-eared. "You've done something remarkable here," he said, gesturing with the book. "You've reminded people that heroes don't always rush into burning buildings. Sometimes they just make breakfast." I laughed, feeling my cheeks warm at the compliment. I had good material to work with. "Dad's right," Miguel said, appearing at his father's side with a plate of cookies. "It's really good, Sarah. My English teacher wants you to come talk to our class about being a writer." "I'd be honored," I said, meaning it. Later that evening, as the last guests were leaving, I found myself standing beside Mabel at the counter, watching as Carlos helped Miguel into his coat. "Well," Mabel said, bumping her shoulder against mine, "looks like you finally found your story." "I think maybe it found me," I replied. Mabel nodded toward Carlos and Miguel. "They're going to be okay, those two." "Yes," I agreed. "They are." "And you? Now that you're a big-shot author, will you still be slinging coffee with us common folk?" I laughed. "One modest advance doesn't make me a big-shot anything. Besides, where else would I find material for my next book?" "Smart girl," Mabel said approvingly. She hesitated, then added, "You know, I've been thinking about retiring. Not right away, but soon. Mark's going to need someone to run this place when I do." I stared at her, surprised. "Are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything yet," she cut in, her tone brisk though her eyes were kind. "Just planting a seed. You've got roots here now, Sarah. More than you realize." As if to emphasize her point, Carlos and Miguel approached to say goodbye. "Dinner Sunday?" Carlos asked, referencing what had become our weekly tradition over the past few months. "Miguel's making his grandmother's enchiladas." "I'd love that," I said. After they left, I stood at the window watching them walk down the street together, Carlos's arm around his son's shoulders. The sight filled me with a quiet joy. I couldn't have imagined that first morning when a silent boy in a navy hoodie had slipped into the cafe. My life had changed in ways both subtle and profound since then. I still served coffee and made breakfast for strangers, but I was no longer just passing time until my real life began. This was my real life, rich with connections, purpose, and stories waiting to be told. The bracelet Miguel had given me months ago still adorned my wrist, its threads faded but holding strong. Like the invisible threads that connected all of us, through kindness, through struggle, through the simple human need to be seen and known. As I turned to help Mabel close up the cafe, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. No longer a woman waiting for her life to start, but one who had found her place in the intricate web of humanity, one cup of coffee at a time. Thank you so much for listening to The Invisible Thread. I hope this story touched your heart as much as it touched mine while creating it. Have you ever experienced a moment of unexpected kindness that changed your life? Or perhaps you've been the one to offer help when someone needed it most? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this tale of connection and compassion resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel for more storytelling that explores the profound impact of small acts of kindness. Remember, we're all connected by invisible threads. Sometimes we just need to pause long enough to see them. Until next time, keep looking for those invisible threads in your own life. They're there, connecting us all.